Hello, and once again, we're keeping up the weekend streak. So you might be asking, this is a nice anti-ice poster. Now you might be asking what today's plan is. And today's plan is very simple. Today, we are walking by. It's a bit funny to say like I'm walking to or I'm going to, because that implies I'll go inside. When of course I'm just passing on the outside, on the publicly accessible sidewalk. But it's also an excuse to walk to Georgetown, which is not the worst thing, despite Georgetown. I think spiritually, it's probably one of the worst places in DC spiritually. Like, if you think of the blob, I associate that with Georgetown. I think part of it's Georgetown University and the fact they have a school dedicated to the foreign service, which of course is a joke of the guy who learns Arabic only to Abu Ghraib people. But what you gonna do? Yeah, so it's come to my attention that it actually, here's the Moroccan embassy. So it's come to my attention that it actually, it does take some effort to figure out like the addresses of these various folks. And so it turns out that like Scott Bessent's was not easy. But if you live in Montgomery County, it turns out it's very easy to figure out, because odds are that, being a Supreme Court justice is a reasonably compensated position, of course. I think you get paid more than a schmuck in Congress. So you can do a renovation. And that's kind of, and so simply speaking, like for certain Supreme Court justices, you can see the renovation permit they apply for, and that's the signal that lets you know. But for Washington D.C., or certainly for say a cabinet appointment, it's not as easy. And so you actually do have to do some sleuthing. And so it turns out, so short of it is, Bessent there is not an easy Google result that pops up. And so I think I was on tilt because I lost some money in a prediction market, probably around something Trump would say. So a bit on tilt. So I figured, plus of course, right, like removing de minimis is a horrible outcome for me personally. My favorite past hobby of collecting replica football shirts. So I figured, you take away my economic liberty of how I can use my disposable income. And in return to own, I will look up your address and potentially at some point walk by your residence. And so Scott Bessent, it's not publicly reported, but what you can do is in the news article, because the news articles, right, like the Wall Street Journal, for all of their quote unquote journalistic willingness to stick the bear, quite literally, with some of their Russia reporting. Like, they won't, of course, actually list the address. I don't think they listed the street either. But another article did. So I knew the street, and I saw an aerial picture of what the house looked like. And so you can clearly tell it's in the top right corner of a block. And so if you know the street, and you know where on the block it is, it makes it kind of easy to triangulate. So I spent 5 minutes just going down, I think it's R Street, I will confirm. I spent 10 minutes just looking at R Street on Google Maps and just looking for houses, because Bessent's house, like, it looks like an H. Like the house setup does. So that's how we identified Bessent. So it wasn't, and that's we're gonna make a quick detour, because last weekend, the Turkish embassy had a huge Turkish flag outside. So I'm not sure if they're doing it. I did some Googling, and so it's not like it was Turkish Independence Day, so I'm not sure why the flag would have been out then. Yeah, it looks like they took it down. Ataturk still going strong, but yeah, they did take the flag down. So very interesting. Yeah, again, I can't figure out why, because like it wasn't Independence Day, or it wasn't a big holiday. So for the flag to be up last weekend, and I don't think it was. It's like, I guess there's always some bigwig that could attend, but not sure. Anyways, that was a nice little detour. But so Bessent's, you had to triangulate independently, and so it turns out RFK Jr. also lives in Georgetown. His was a bit easier, and that all you needed to do was just if you just Google RFK house enough, like you'll stumble across a Zillow listing, and like it will be a random Zillow listing, but it does match the description, because apparently that house, it's actually somewhat architecturally well respected. So like it actually has like a collector's presence or whatever. So it actually shows up. So again, like that Zillow listing, it's literally just a listing, but it'll specify. Or again, like it doesn't specify it, but you'll see the pictures on the listing. And you can just cross-reference that to a news article that talks about it, and then just do some pattern recognition, and you can call it a day. So that's the plan. You know, it's not as cold as last weekend, but so that's some sleeping. To hear about like schmucks talk, like Bellingcat or those schmucks talk about open source intelligence, and it's like, well, this is the best I can do. Just staring at Google Maps, looking for an H on somebody's house. But it worked, so here we are. So that is how you find it. Now, the other point, of course, is to the broader theme of just parts of DC that are nice, that you kind of want to go or you think of being DC, and places that aren't. And functionally, Georgetown is expressly the part of DC that you think of when it's DC. Again, I think that's why I certainly associate it with the blob. Just grimy is not the right word because it is a nice built environment, but just thinking about like who the bad guys are, quote unquote, in American government. I'd probably say odds are that they reside in Georgetown, or spiritually they reside in Georgetown. For example, I was walking around Georgetown's waterfront. This would have been probably back in like very early spring. It was very busy, as usual. And so I was walking around, and there was literally a yacht, or yacht's overstating it, but it's literally a boat with the Royal Iranian flag. It's like that is such on the nose that would, A, happen and exist in Georgetown, and B, that the person with it would feel so comfortable so as to have it. Because I don't know. I don't think that Shah was a good guy. But I don't know. Your enemy is my guy, or your guy as long as he's my guy. Yeah, what do I know? I did not go to Georgetown's Foreign Service School. I instead just sat in spreadsheets. So that's that. I suppose, as always, for my vanity, fit check. Hair not as messy, but today we're a Racing club. Of course, from Buenos Aires, Argentina. Because, there's some uniqueness points for wearing a Racing club. So, and it is the right pronunciation, it turns out. Racine. It's not racing. It's not Racing, as in French. It's Racine. Scene versus sing versus ing. I don't know, it just looks elegant. A lot of sponsors. Yeah. If you might notice, I have the button buttoned up. It's like, is that pretentious? I'm just walking around. I have it buttoned up. I don't button up my polo shirt when I go to work. On a Friday with a polo. It's like, I don't know. I feel like it's one of those 50-50 things where I could be convinced either way that it is pretentious or it isn't pretentious. I think in practice my answer varies depending on who I'm talking to. And so the short of it is, I'm evidently just not a guy of principle. Evidently. It is the only takeaway I can have. It's like, yeah, it's like the joke of the guy who just like morphs into whatever his girlfriend wants or what he thinks his girlfriend wants. And it's like, yeah, clearly I'm theoretically spineless, but she won't know that until the second or third date, so therefore, and it's like, well, yeah, I totally have the idea, performativeness and doing whatever it takes to achieve those things. But I do suppose on that note, as it turns out, I do love to complain or whinge about the disappointing reality in this aspect, but I do suppose recently becoming 23, don't think that's that private, given you can kind of back into my age, given the handful of 21 plus activities I've documented on this channel. But yeah, so recently turned 23, and so naturally, you can do, so naturally that's 5 years after 18, right? 18 plus 5 equals 23. Last I checked. And 5 years is a nice increment. Having to think about things every year sounds a bit dreary and disappointing. But every 5 years, that sounds fine. Lots of countries do 5-year plans. It's a nice round number. So why not? And so I loosely recall making a list at 18 of what I wish, like what I hope I would have accomplished or have done by the time I'm 5 years in. Or at that point, like, I don't know, if I'm lucky, 20% of the way through life. If I'm unlucky, 30%, 40%, 50%. But I suppose the great irony of life is you never know how far you are down to percents. And it's a shame the only percentiles you get to know are your damn SAT scores. But so I loosely have a list, and I generally recall like wishing to just, I guess at that point in high school, or I guess I would have been in college, but it would have been during COVID remote, and I didn't have a car, or wasn't in a city, just a bit more limited. And so I distinctly remember, like, loosely feeling, like wanting to have autonomy is not the right word, but just more variance. And that I do think I have appreciation for, the clock is ticking, you're never getting younger, you should enjoy the different stages in life. And so with that, right, then you just kind of want to like do random things. Just like not have every day be the same. And again, just like literally just have variance. Unfortunately, and of course there's easy ways to get variance, and then there's, I think, the more meaningful and of course more difficult ways to get variance, right? It's probably like, well, the easy way to get variance is to just, I don't know, have a slight but non-problematic gambling thing, and that's a perfectly legit way that certainly will get you variance. It's reasonably high quality variance, or it's not malicious variance, as long as you size your bets accordingly, or as long as you're consistent in your sizing. You can get bad variance if you become a criminal, or if you hop to fair turnstile, right? So at least I'm intelligent enough to not succumb to that type of variance. But back to my favorite things to complain about. I do think the better variance is to, or you can think of travel as probably being like the more superficial thing. Yeah, I mean, it's valid. Again, you only have so many days off. You only have so much flexibility, right? Like, you could only have visited Red Square before 2022, and who knows how long it'll take for it to be resolved. Or you can go, but it's not the most accessible, right? With airline prices and all that, because you have to functionally like route through Istanbul or whatnot. So, and then you could have like dating and those things. It's a bit funny. I think about like a lot of my friends. There's certainly among my friends who happen to be guys. And it's like, dog, we are all so cooked. But here's a bit funny. The fact that all of us are consistently cooked. So at least in that sense, it's almost like we like subconsciously knew that. You know, it probably feels bad if like one of your guys, one of the boys, is in a happy relationship and you're not. So it's like we subconsciously like developed a safety mechanism by making sure that none of us were. That is kind of like the idea of like normative determinism, normative determinism, where your name affects what job you do. Of course, Bill Ackman, that funny New York Magazine article, you know, somewhat subscribes to normative materialism or determinism. And then like ChatGPT it for examples of I'm gonna Google it. It's something determinism. Nominative determinism. And it's the joke that your name affects or has an influence on what job you work. And it's like, the prime example is probably Usain Bolt. You know, and damn, if Usain Bolt is not the literal example or prime example of nominative determinism. Usain Bolt's one example. I guess you could have musician names, but Alicia Keys as a musician, although that's a fake or an act name, so it probably doesn't count as much. But that's a loose idea, effectively. And again, so, I mean, I'm sure there's longitudinal studies you could do about, like, alphabetical order, and there's probably some breakpoint where there is actually a difference, or an impact. So imagine being last called versus first call, there is some difference that builds up over time. Or being on the 13th letter versus the 14th letter, or being in that midpoint, and how, you know, you can easily split things up that way. So I think there is variance in that sense. Or again, just the very small ways that things can build up over time and affect things. So, I'm not sure how my name fits into nominative determinism. Maybe I'm I guess somebody always has to be the A/B test. So, it may as well be me, right? We're gonna do a little detour. I think this is a dead end, but yeah, because it turns out, so of course the joke about Georgetown is that it's not metro accessible in the literal sense. But I think as we just saw, it's 20 minutes in and we've made it pretty deep into Georgetown, right? You know, if there's a will, there's a way. So you can make it work. Something else we noted, that there is a Dumbarton Park, which I've not been to, but I've heard from a friend is a nice setup. But yeah, pretty much, yeah, we're just gonna kill some time. Because Bessent's house is, like, so we walked past it, you know, when you see the black SUVs, that's a good tell. It's got the American flag, you know, it's another thing. But, and then RFK's house is like 4 blocks away. So it's, I don't know. I kind of like these. Of course, the joke about like YouTube is, of course, everybody just min-maxes to have the video be over 10 minutes long for the algorithm or stuff like that. You know, not that I have any incentive or things like that. Because of course I suppose under the old YouTube rules, I was actually somewhat close to being able to monetize. Although, in the new framework, I'm not. So no hashtag passive income for me. But, you know, again, that's why I used to have a gambling habit. Yeah, I think, I don't know, in retrospect, like in prediction markets, you could argue there's always going to be like that left tail scenario desire to bet on the extreme odds, right? Like there's a back when the U.S., you know, decides to strike Iran, there's a market on Kalshi about, will the Shah or the Shah's son Pahlavi return to Iran? At some point, it was trading, so it traded up to 40%. And just given how the market, of course, naturally, like 40% is extremely high. So naturally it traded down, but at some point you could have bought it at 20%, at 30%. So, you know, to take the no, or so you would have bought the no at 70% or 80 cents. And presumably it'd be a very like binary event, right? Like either you have regime change or you don't. You know. But clearly, right, like if you wanted to express a view on regime change in Iran, that would be how you do it. So, and again, you could have. So some people could have monetized that. I unfortunately did not have the habit of checking the politics new markets tab. So now I do a better job of checking all markets that are new every night. But back then, at that point, I was very much in my degen, like Rotten Tomatoes market stuff, right? Because presumably, the same way when a sports book sets the lines for like odds, they can be a bit off. And so you can do the same thing with prediction markets. And loosely speaking, I do suppose the issue is that, because like the bet you're making, right, is that you know more. Because in a sportsbook, you're trying to say that you know more than whatever bookies the sportsbook have. I think that's probably a pretty tough thing to do. Or if you're, anyways, we'll table it. We'll table that discussion about bookies and all of that. Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's, I think this is Bessent's place. Video proof again, maybe I'm incriminating myself, but I think so. Like there's a camera and a flag, but, and of course, the good old Fords. So I think it is fun to think about, I guess a side shot. It is fun to think about, right, because we walked by Powell's house, and you can compare Powell to Bessent. I think the SUV was on. There's a guy there. But, probably should take a quick selfie while out there. But so we walked by Powell's house, and so the joke is, who has the nicer house versus who has the hierarchy in the chain. And it's like, well, I forget the rules about who's higher up versus who. But it's like, well, they're both in the top 100 most important people in the US. So I do suppose it's different strokes for different folks. But, you know, do what you want. Probably Bessent's got the nicer setup, I would argue. Right, you're in Georgetown. You've got, clearly from your SUVs, you got prime access. Right, you've got, so the funny part is, the funny thing about Bessent, so here's the library. So the funny thing about the Bessent house thing is I remember walking down the street last summer, which is of course before the election. And so I distinctly remember like walking by, and of course, like, you know, like there were no suburban, because again, the suburban SUV is very obvious. So I distinctly remember walking by and not noticing anything. And then of course, and so I haven't been to Georgetown. Like when I came back and I saw the Royal Iranian flag, I wasn't walking down this way. But I distinctly remember walking to the library because I needed to go piss. And so I remember that distinctly. Yeah, and so I remember walking down that street and there was literally nothing like noticeable about that. And then of course you bought it. And then you saw like the flag and you saw the SUV. Maybe you heard that one door open. I don't know. Again, it's not hard to piece together the pieces, you know. And it's also funny, like, if anybody's actually getting worked up about me doing it, it's like, if there was an actual espionage service, they wouldn't, you would go about it very differently, right? I don't know. Yeah, so I guess it is funny to contrast security. So Bessent's got two SUVs. How? Well, I think Powell had two. The nice thing is we can check the footage. Here's a nice part. So here's literally we can check the footage and contrast the arrangements if we want. But yeah, so that was Bessent's. Of course, Bessent's you can't really see a lot. I suppose if you want, you could walk up the side street, but like, of course, unlike Teal's estate, where you know it's a work in process for putting up the extracting plants. Really, the people before Bessent, or whoever he bought the house from, you know, are above. Now, it turns out Howard Lutnick also lives loosely in the Georgetown area. Oh, he's deeper in. For the purposes of today's video, I'm not that motivated to walk by. Because again, the point isn't that person X lives in place X. But it's the fact that, you know, one of the top 100 people in the US lives in a built environment like this. And, you know, presumably the built environment changes over time. Or maybe there's an earthquake or something. So, what can you do? You know? Oh, there's a little SUV in the back right there. Oh, so I guess that is Huh. Not sure if you saw it, because I turned around slowly, but I guess in that back alley there was also an SUV. So I guess he's got 3 SUVs. It turns out. That feels like a tall order. I'm not sure if RFK can beat that, if I'm thinking about it. Yeah, because 3 SUVs implies a certain amount of for lack of a better word, street parking. You know, and street parking can be a finite resource, as the city zoning boards like to remind us. So we'll see. But again, it's just the irony. I think it's very charming that, you know, you can loosely. Now, I'm not sure how much walking Bessent does. Like, you always need to walk around with a handler. Maybe that seems a bit ungratifying, if you ask me. I certainly like the autonomy of being, you know, as nice as like growing up. It'd be nice to be famous and all that. I've certainly come around, like, as long as like you're famous enough to where, like, I don't know, you can you have enough social capital, or like it's not a red flag so like you can just, like, I don't know, it's like naturally easily date, like that's fine, you know. But otherwise it's like it's really a marginal benefit unless you're being like an influencer where you're monetizing that aggressively, you know. And that feels it's like a pyramid, right? Like, you can only be an influencer if people are being influenced by you. And naturally that needs, like, in terms of monetizable sense, that needs to be a pyramid. You can't invert it, right? Let's figure out we're going the right way. Yeah, that's the best thing. Turns out, fun fact, he is not the first openly gay cabinet member, but he is second, I believe, because I think Mayor Pete beat him to it by being the first openly gay cabinet member. I do suppose again, I still a quick Google search on a subway. You could also argue that, you know, Trump's handy guy, Rick Grinnell, apparently is also gay, but he wasn't, like, he's not a cabinet person. No, Vespa. Again, that's probably a bit Georgetown-esque. So you could argue that Rick Grinnell could also be viewed as someone who knocks Bessent lower on the list, but he wasn't officially nominated. And so Bessent is the 3rd openly gay president. Now, there's a joke somewhere. There's a joke somewhere where Trump had a gay cabinet member before Obama and all of that. So there's a joke somewhere in that. And of course, there is also that great, I forget the story or what magazine had it, but Obama had a line where it's like, Mayor Pete can never be president, or will never be president, because he's short and gay, which implies that being homosexual is a great impediment to electability, which is true. You know, you can have questions about, well, which communities contribute to that not being true, or contribute to that being true. And it's like, well, I guess the South Carolina primary exists for a reason. Which is actually so funny if you think about it. Like, the Democratic Party literally has South Carolina as a way to prevent actual democracy, or something in the primary, which I just find super charming. Again, that's just a funny. It's like, really, South Carolina is the third state on the primary list. Yeah, it's like, yeah, sorry, Bernie. Joe Biden's taking the wheels. Yeah, I don't vote in primaries. So clearly I should shut up. But anyways, those are your fun facts, you know. Again, I use Google Gemini for that one. Because I reserve ChatGPT for my higher functioning questions. There's a camera there. So I'm not sure. I guess you could have a camera. Just to have a camera. I guess that kind of defeats the point at times. But yeah, I will say again, like walking past like Teal's thing and you see all the random houses and for like for people that have like reasonable influence or matter, it's like, huh. Again, I imagine Georgetown is very much like that. Or, you know, Georgetown is like that. So it's just, again, it's just small things you like key in on. Probably the same way if you're in New York, you can get spider senses for certain things. No, I think we're close. I have no idea if actually or not. Oh, let's see. Oh, is that a Napoleon thing? Oh, that's cool. That is cool. This is actually supposed to be again, that's what makes walking around so enjoyable. The random things. Napoleon. Because you can see the N. That's pretty dope. I don't know. Maybe the guy's just a big Napoleon fan. Likewise. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So I think this is well, I don't know. I'm 90% sure this is the place. 90% sure this is RFK's. I'm 90% sure.